Welcome to your Canadiens Connection on Rocket Sports Radio. We are proud to be the trusted source for all things Habs for more than a decade. This is the Canadiens Connection Podcast. We are going to get you to all of the latest Habs hockey talk that you are here for in just a minute. But while Rick and Michael are getting settled in the studio, I just want to bring you a quick message from our brand new sponsor for the show, Manscaped. So ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to announce that smooth sack summer is officially upon us. When your man is playing in the summer sun, make sure he's groomed from pubes to bum. Thanks to our friends over at Manscaped, he can make this season his smoothest yet. The Performance Package 5.0 Ultra is the ultimate bundle to keep his boys downstairs cool while looking hot. Have him join the 10 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped. With our exclusive offer right here on the show, get 20% off plus free shipping when you go to manscaped.com and use code THPN. It's summertime, and the trimming is easy, right? Hey, the Manscaped Performance Package 5.0 Ultra has everything he needs to prepare for that summer bod. And inside the package, you'll get the star of the show, which is the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. And Manscaped even threw in 2 free gifts on this package, the Manscaped Boxers and the Shed travel bag. So get 20% off plus free shipping with the code THPN at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping with the code THPN at manscaped.com. Hey, it's smooth sack summer, ladies and gentlemen. Get your mans or yourselves on board or get left behind. Now let's get to the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio, keeping you informed, engaged, and entertained. My name is Michael Spinella, and I'll be your host for the next hour. This is episode 304 of the Canadiens Connection podcast, and I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by my co-host, who is the founder and the president of Rocket Sports, Mr. Rick Stevens. How's it going today, Rick?
It's going pretty good. We're calling it, you said, episode 304. We're calling it Montreal Canadiens Prospects Eat, Sleep, Train, and then Repeat. Have you been getting your sleep? Have you been training? Have you been eating properly, Michael?
I've been eating and sleeping, I can tell you that much.
Well, I think that probably goes for many of our listeners as well who are enjoying the summer and maybe by the beach, maybe at the cottage. Maybe just mowing the lawn, but they're taking the Canadiens Connection podcast with them wherever they go because they don't want to miss a thing. And listen, it's been a little quiet this week. Got a text yesterday and said, I know you're moving, but keep your phone with you next week. So today, and that was somebody who should know. So you know if whatever stock you put in that. There's still all kinds of things, as we talked about before the podcast started in our pre-show prep. You said we're kind of getting used to a summer trade. So when's that going to come? Is that going to come midsummer? Is it going to get closer to when training camp opens? We'll see.
It can happen whenever, just not 5 minutes after we finish recording today,
Yeah, that'd be
ideally.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But today, if all goes as planned, we will get you up to date on everything Montreal Canadiens in this first segment. Some roster news, some prospect news as well, and some news from around the NHL. We also have some audio coming in from Yakov Novak. In segment 2, we will welcome back our Rocket Sports Media medical consultant, Dr. Stephen Morris, and we're going to be talking about off-season training. And in segment 3, it's a Have Your Say segment. We'll turn it over to our listeners to hear what they have to say, but also our Canadiens Connection question of the week is, which Habs prospect do you believe has the greatest chance of making the opening night roster this year? We want to hear from you. And Rick, what's the best way for people to reach out to us and let us know their thoughts?
We've set up a text line for you, especially. It's the Rocket Sports text line, just so that you can text us 24 hours a day. Hey, you can call it and leave a voicemail message if you want to, but text we hear most commonly from our listeners. That text line is easy to remember, 5853-ROCKET. Just remember, 5853-ROCKET, and text us anytime.
You can also follow us on social media. Make sure that you are following at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Plus, we have a website you can check out. That's canadiensconnection.fm. And here's an interesting story that appeared this past week. The spotlight was put on Jordan Harris in the latest edition of My Man. The Canadiens defenseman's girlfriend, Cody Cross, shared insights into his life off the ice. And was there anything interesting there that stood out to you, Rick?
It's kind of that off-season soft news, interesting feature that Canadiens.com is doing. Cody Cross says she met Jordan Harris in 2019. Both were at Northeastern. He was on the men's hockey team. She was on the women's hockey team. She said that she is 2 years older than Jordan, and what she likes most, what she admires most, what she considers his best quality is that he is patient. He's patient when he's speaking to people. She said he has that kind of philosophy of just caring about where his feet are at the moment and just devoting all his attention, whether that's on the ice, whether that's off the ice, and talking to people. She also talked about, we remember that Jordan was the Canadiens' nomination for the King Clancy Memorial Trophy for his community work. And she said that together they really enjoyed doing volunteer work and community work. And afterwards, they end up talking for days about how much fun that is, and so that's something they'll always do whenever Jordan has time. As far as things that you might not know about Jordan Harris, she says he's a really good cook. He makes most of their meals, gets kind of creative in the kitchen. And she said if there's one song that describes her man, Jordan Harris, it's Dancing Queen by ABBA, that he loves to dance, and he's just a chill and carefree guy, so she says.
Oh, he sounds like a great person, and I'm sure we all appreciate a lot of his charity work, too. So nice to hear about that from her perspective. The next bit of soft news here is in regards to the Summer of Love. And we talked about Brendan Gallagher's wedding last week. Well, photos of Brendan Gallagher and Emma Fortin's wedding have emerged this week. You can see lots of Habs in some of these photos, including Carey Price. And honestly, it's just absolutely stunning.
Stunning. It's luxurious reception hall, Maison Principale, the lighting, the decor, it just spectacular. It looked like a Hollywood type wedding, and yeah, you can see from the dress to the spectacular wedding ring she's wearing. This was a big event for Montreal Canadiens, and part of, as we've been saying, the Summer of Love.
So make sure that you follow daily Habs posts throughout the offseason via Rocket Sports on Twitter, and check out our exclusive content at InsideTheCanadiens.com. Taking a look at some roster news, RDS has projected lines and defense pairings for the upcoming season. Just kind of quickly rattle some of these off. The top line, as expected, Caulfield, Suzuki, Slavkovsky. Line 2 is where it gets a little bit interesting. On the wing, Newhook. In the middle, Kirby Dach. On the other wing, Yoel Armia. I actually don't mind that. Third line, Joshua Waugh, Christian Dvorak, Brendan Gallagher. Fourth line, Raphael, Harvey Pinard, Jake Evans, and Josh Anderson. I think very bold to put Josh Anderson on that fourth line. And three extras in terms of players, so Alex Barry-Boulet, Emil Heineman, and Michael Pezzetta. I look at the forward groups, and I think something else that stands out to me is you could easily move on from one of those veterans, and you certainly have a replacement ready to go.
Well, it's they certainly haven't adhered to the roster limit. They're playing a little fast and loose with the rules, and that's fine. It's July, so they're just putting that out there. Pretty easy to project the top line in Suzuki, Caulfield, and Slavkovsky, but I'd like to see at some point during the year. We remember the chemistry that was developing, short-lived, mind you, but between Slavkovsky and Doc, I'd like to see, a Slavkovsky, Doc, Anderson kind of line. As you said, pretty bold putting Army up there. I can see why. That's not going to sit well with many Canadiens fans, though. Joshua, I think lots of fans are ready to promote him into the top six. I think he needs to prove himself a little bit more before that happens. Fourth line, I understand RHP in there, but he had a really rough season. I know there was injuries involved, but when he was on the ice, he was just invisible. The names I'd add to this forward group for consideration, they have Alex Barré-Boulet, and I understand why they do that. I expect that he'll play most of the season in Laval. But where's Owen Beck? Where's Sean Farrell? I think both could be under consideration to be in that forward group.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that. Taking a look at how they project out the defense pairings, I think they made a couple bold swings here. The top pairing, Matheson and Gooley. We saw plenty of that last year, and I know that neither of us was really a fan of having Gooley on the right side.
Yes, okay, yeah, I'm going to play. Say that again. Matheson and Gooley. No. I think we'd like to see Gooley move back to the left side with maybe a stronger defense partner. The second pairing, interesting too, Lane Hudson, David Savard. We'll talk about David Savard in a little bit, but I like that they're projecting Hudson to come out and be on that second pairing right away. And the third pairing being Arbor Xhekaj and Jaden Struble. It's a lot of muscle, I guess. And we'll see if anyone maybe pushes those two players out of the way. There are three extras: Jordan Harris, Justin Barron, Logan Mailloux. You're going to have to convince me that all three of these guys are not going to crack this roster, because I think at least one or two of them probably should be. And unfortunately, I would have them ahead of Struble and Xhekaj for sure. Yeah, I think Struble is on the bubble. I mean, he had a very good, a very good season. But you need a Xhekaj and a Struble, especially on the same line. I understand that'd be kind of fun to watch, but and especially with Logan Mailloux in waiting, who brings the physicality, but also far more of an offensive potential than those two. Where's David Reinbacher? No love for David Reinbacher. He looked very good in Laval. I understand. Give him more seasoning. Let him play some more games there. But he should be under consideration if he has a good training camp as well. I don't like, I'll say it again, I don't like that priority is going to the veteran over the young core player in Caden Gooley. Put Caden Gooley where he belongs, and then fit people around him. He's got to play on the left side this coming season. I know they've moved Kovacevic, but I think you have to move another veteran, whether it be Matheson or David Savard. Probably David Savard, to make more room. And yes, because you have Harris, you have Barron, who is no longer waiver exempt. And Mailloux with a brilliant season last year in Laval, one of the best defensemen in the American Hockey League, contrary to some. We'll get to that later. And like I said, David Reinbacher. So that's it's interesting. I don't agree with much there.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, plenty of room to move out one or two players, particularly a veteran. And in terms of goaltenders, no surprise whatsoever, Montembeault and Caden Primo. No changes there. But I mentioned we would talk a little bit about David Savard here. There is a report from the fourth period saying that several teams have shown interest in David Savard. This includes some teams out west. We've talked about David Savard maybe being on the trade block as we approach the draft. There was a few occasions earlier this year in which he appeared on some of the trade boards. I think that this summer is probably now or never type situation to move on from Savard and to make room for some of the younger players.
Let me just circle back quickly to we skipped past the goaltender. You mentioned the goaltenders. I just wanted to say you're absolutely right in that, and I agree with RDS. It looks like it's going to be a Montembeault Primo tandem, and that's absolutely the most likely scenario. It'd just be a little fun if Jakub Dobas throws some question into that rotation at some point, and if he has a spectacular, I think he's just got he had a good season last year. He was really strong down the stretch for Laval, and he's got just a unique, one of those quirky goaltender personalities. It would be fun just to throw a question mark in. If he has a good training camp. But back to David Savard, yes, the fourth period says that, according to their information, that the Dallas Stars, the Colorado Avalanche, and the Winnipeg Jets have each expressed interest, as you said, 3 Western Conference teams, in the services of David Savard, and I'd just say can't get that done. That's all I have to say there.
And if not Savard, you can also try Matheson. It's fine. One final note here in terms of trade rumblings. There are some trade rumblings involving Montreal and Winnipeg. That is in regard to Rutger McGroarty. There is a rumored package involving Philippe Michard and other pieces that Montreal offered to Winnipeg. I would be all for this, and I think this is where Montreal has done a good job of stockpiling a lot of prospects and picks so that they can go after a player like this that I think has a lot of potential and still pretty young. So certainly like what I hear in regard to that, but it sounds like a lot of other teams are in the mix here to try and get this player.
This is fascinating, and no, we're not pumping an internet rumor or a social media rumor. Let me say this. This story originated from a hockey blog in Slovakia that was talking specifically about Philippe Michard, and the title of the article from Andreas, the sports journalist Andreas Strompova. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that right. Andreas says, "Will Philippe Michard leave Montreal? ? The Canadiens offer a Slovak forward," and so they seem to have gathered information. As you said, Philippe Michard is part of this package to pry Rutger McGroarty from Winnipeg. So the information they have, it would be Michard, a first-round pick, either the Panthers or the Flames in 2025, and a young defenseman. Whether it's Justin Barron or Jordan Harris, they don't know. But it says that Winnipeg has rejected that offer for now, which is a pretty big offer. They go on to talk about whether Philippe Michard has lost favor and has been pushed down the depth chart in Montreal, and one of the reasons that this may be happening. It's, I know that this is kind of stalled. I expect that that there's going to be a domino here. Patrick Laine is going to be, he'll leave the player assistance program. Something will happen with either Patrick Laine or Trevor Zegras or Natchez. I think one of those dominoes has to fall before we see a McGroarty trade. But we'll keep an eye on that and see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. And with that, I think it's a good time to get to the Habs prospect report.
It's time for the Rocket Report. The Rocket Sports Media Team is your premier source for information about the Laval Rocket, the AHL affiliate of the Montreal Canadiens, as well as Habs prospects playing in the CHL, NCAA, and leagues around the world. Bookmark thn.com/Montreal to follow our comprehensive coverage of Canadiens prospects.
Each week, we like to shine the spotlight on a Montreal Canadiens prospect, and this week we will shine the spotlight on forward Philip Eriksson, left shot center. He's 5'11", sixth round pick in 2023. That was number 165 overall, coming off a season in which he put up, I think, between two different teams, about 30 points here. Is certainly someone that we've talked about a few times. And Rick, I think there was kind of an interesting story about him this past week. Yeah,
there was an interview done by the good folks at TVA Sport. They interviewed Philippe Eriksson's coach. That's Tommy Samuelsson, who's a veteran coach. And he said, find the quote here, I've coached several players in my career who have made it to the NHL. And he lists, there's a list, Jonas Brodin, Rasmus Asplund, Joel Eriksson-Ek. And he says, I can tell you without hesitation that I've never seen Philip Eriksson's sense of the game and his ability to manage the puck under pressure. He said, I want people to understand how unusual it is to see a 19-year-old guy come into our league after a season ruined by injury and dominate like that. And when he says dominate, Philippe Eriksson had 24 points in 21 games, and that's he had 29 games, I think, in the SHL. That's the league we're familiar with. Tier 2 is the Allsvenskan League, and that's where he got more than a point a game. But at 19, that's a big accomplishment, especially because the prior season he missed a good part of the season with a broken hand. So Philippe says, honestly, I was really surprised to be selected, and that was in the 2023 draft, as you said, 165th overall. Considering the fact that I hadn't been able to play a lot, he was injured in his draft year. I felt like I hadn't really demonstrated my know-how, but I was very happy to be chosen by the Montreal Canadiens. Tommy Samuelsson goes on to say, his puck management and his ability to read the game are off the charts. He knows what's going to happen 10 seconds later. It's both strange and spectacular. He's constantly well-positioned. He's the kind of prospect who has the ability to separate the offensive zone into sectors and analyze them while controlling the puck. This means that his choices are often very good. He spots his teammates well, but doesn't hesitate to shoot when necessary. And he was used in all situations on special teams and so on. So he is scheduled to play in the SHL this coming year. And he's a prospect that we're going to keep an eye on. Especially, these are glowing comments from his coach, Tommy Samuelsson, and kudos to TVA Sport for setting up that interview.
Yep, like pretty much everything I heard there, and like you said, we'll make sure to keep an eye on him throughout the next season. Some news coming from the Laval Rocket. The Laval Rocket released their 2024-25 schedule, and the season's going to start against the Comets on October 30th. And Rick, anything stand out to you from that schedule?
Well, they open their schedule on the road, and so Friday, October 11th, they head to Providence, and they will play in the Bruins home opener. Next night, they travel to Springfield, and they play in the Thunderbirds home opener, which is it's always tough because there's ceremonies and whatnot. So 11th and 12th are on the road, and then they return to Laval and they host Syracuse. There's a rivalry there. And that will be Laval's home opener on Friday, October 18th. But there's actually back-to-back games. So they play the Syracuse Crunch at Place Belle on Friday and Saturday, October 18th and 19th. Get your tickets now. And that's when they'll make their own home debut. And then there's, as you said, 3 games against the Utica Comets to finish the month of October. The only other thing I noticed in their schedule is that they play Belleville on a Wednesday, February 12th, and that's not interesting in itself because they play Belleville 100 times during the season. But that game will be at the Canadian Tire Center. Yeah, and it's during the NHL break for the Four Nations Cup. So that might be interesting seeing Laval in an NHL arena, and typically when the Canadiens go to the Canadian Tire Center, it's filled with Montreal fans. I expect there's going to be some of that as well when Laval visits on February 12th.
Yeah, I've actually seen one of the former Senators affiliates play at the Canadian Tire Center a while back, but it was against the Marlies. So there was one point in which that was an annual event, but I think they kind of strayed away from that in more recent history. But nonetheless, it's always a fun event. And if you're in Montreal, not too far a drive to go if you want to go and have some fun.
Absolutely.
The Rocket bid farewell to 4 former players. That includes Durando, Parker Jones, Voyer, and I don't think there's really anyone that we're going to miss too much, are we?
Yeah, we've got Riley McKay going to the Henderson Silver Knights, and we know that, I mean, the definition of bad penalty follows Riley McKay, but for whatever reason, he was an absolute favorite of JF Uhl. John Parker Jones, and he was back and forth to Trois-Rivières. He's got a position with the Ontario Reign in the AHL, Voyer in Slovakia, and Durando in Russia. And I think that's fine. We've talked several times about finding the right veterans that are going to support the young players. There's going to be more younger players in Laval, and the veterans must be in a support role.
Yeah. The Laval Rocket did sign a younger veteran forward, Alex Bocage, to an AHL contract for the 2024-25 season. Last year, he spent time between the AHL and the ECHL, kind of a fringe player in the Avalanche organization, and he's a former third-round pick by Colorado as well. So kind of interesting to see what he's going to be able to do for this Laval Rocket team coming up.
Chris is right on top of all these signings for both Laval and for the Trois-Rivières Lions. So be sure on X, on Twitter, that you're following at Chris Habs360. Chris is, what good work Chris does. He's been with me for 100 years, and he's, as I said, on top of all of this.
And a little bit of news coming from the Trois-Rivières Lions. The Lions have signed forwards Anthony Beauchamp and Ryan Bruchette, as well as defenseman Jacob Paquette and Corey Thomas for the 2024-25 season. So Beauchamp spent last year in the ECHL with the Swamp Rabbits. Ryan Bruchette is a center from the NCAA. Jacob Paquette spent some time with the Lions last season, as did Corey Thomas. So you might be a little bit familiar with those two.
Yeah, this is the Lions filling out their roster. Earlier in the week, they qualified some players from last year. These are new additions to the team.
You can find all our content about Canadiens prospects at our Rocket Sports YouTube account, InsideTheCanadiens.com. And we have a couple quotes from this week, and this ties in very well with the ECHL Trois-Rivières Lions and the AHL Laval Rocket, as on July the 1st, the Rocket signed Yakov Novak to a 1-year, one-way AHL contract. He spent last year primarily with the ECHL Lions, and we have some audio from him. He's talking about his support system in this first one.
I loved it. The couple of games I played in Laval this last year, and I think what's going on right now, and the way the organization is trending that's where I want to, that's where I want to play. That's where I want to be. I think it's, great staff, great support system. You know what, like if you ever need anything, there's always someone you could reach out to. The support system there is incredible, along with the players. There's a lot of good players there too. And you know what, I think that, we all come together, and you just never know. Hopefully, everyone's goal is, win the Calder.
So why are we featuring a player like this? Well, it's because of what he's talking about, the support system. There's the support system around the team. There's the support within the team. There's the supports within the organization. And we talked about finding the right veterans. Yakov Novak is 25 years old. He was a 7th round pick in 2018 by the Ottawa Senators. He's been around only 2 games in the AHL, and he talked about that in that clip. The 2 games that he played for Laval, 161 games in the NCAA, 80 games in the ECHL. But you need players that are going to be able to handle that transition from, say, the ECHL to play and be effective in the ECHL, and then move up to the Laval Rocket. Yakov Novak actually set a franchise record last year with the Trois-Rivières Lions. He had 30 goals and 26 assists. 30 goals is the record, 26 assists for 56 points in 66 games for Trois-Rivières. So again, you need key pieces, and he was one of them this past year, and hopefully for this next year.
And the second bit of audio coming from Novak, he's talking about what he can control.
I think the most positive things is just, keep working hard. I think that's something that I've been kind of doing through my hockey career. It's never really been a straight path. So I think that, how you can always judge how hard you work. You can never really decide, the way other things happen. But I think if you just focus on how hard you work and, kind of make that contagious and bring that into the team and, have that culture through everyone, I think it only makes you stronger, and it also helps push your teammates. So I think that's the biggest thing is, just always stay even keel and, make sure that each day you're giving it your best.
Find the right veterans who have the right attitude, who know their role. He said he's so well-spoken. He said so many good things, and you want everybody throughout the organization to be talking the way he is. He said his path to pro hockey wasn't a straight line. I've said for a million years, development is not linear. He spent in the NAHL is where he was recruited and drafted. That's not a common league. Then he spent 5 years in the NCAA at Bentley University, and then at Northeastern, wore a letter his final year at Northeastern, and then found his way to Trois-Rivières and a couple games with Laval, as I mentioned. The other thing that I really liked, him saying that, you can't control. There's no use worrying about injuries. There's no use, and I'm filling in, obviously here. I'm paraphrasing. There's no use worrying about what you can't control, whether you get sent up, sent down, whatever. What you can control is how hard you work, and I think that's a great message for those kinds of players, those kinds of support players. And he said that if you have enough of those kind of players, that culture towards hard work, it goes throughout it becomes contagious and goes throughout the team. Again, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And again, it's finding the right veterans. And another veteran that was brought back to the organization, Laurent Dauphin, we remember he spent 1 year with Laval and then went off to the Arizona organization. It was LaPresse, I believe, that interviewed him. And he said, at first I was disappointed not to receive a two-way contract offer. And we remember in the past, last year particularly, there was all kinds of guys who were playing in Laval who had a two-way offer with the NHL and AHL. And they were playing for themselves. They were playing for themselves to get that call up to the Montreal Canadiens, and it didn't fit. And unfortunately, you had a coach who prioritized the veterans. And now with a one-way contract, as Laurent Dauphin said, at first he was disappointed, but he said, well, he made a joke saying, my girlfriend's really happy with the one-way contract. Now she knows where I'll be all the time. But he said, I'm at the point in my career when I don't want to do that anymore, going back and forth, and the stress of that. He went on to say what his role was. He said, I will be asked to be a good veteran, capable of mentoring the youngsters, helping them perform well, and I'm ready to do that. That's the kind of veteran you want. So the quotes from both Laurent Dauphin and Yakov Novak, I think there's a signal change there about the kinds of players that the Canadiens are looking for to stock the Laval Rocket.
Yeah, and I know that on this podcast, we've given Laval a little bit of flack for the types of players they bring in to fill out their roster, and you touched on it a little bit, but it just seems like Yakov Novak has the right attitude for a guy that could make that jump from the ECHL to a full-time AHLer. So certainly appreciate hearing both of those quotes, and we'll keep an eye on whether or not there truly is a little bit of a cultural change within that organization. And towards the end of the segment here, we've got some hockey news from around the league. Starting things off, the names of the Florida Panthers in 2023-24 have been engraved on the Stanley Cup. So another big congrats to them. You can find the photo of this online. And truly a special moment for that whole organization.
You know that I'm an admirer of head coach Paul Maurice. I think he's a brilliant coach, one of the smartest coaches in the league. Happy for him. And Roberto Luongo, I think most people in Montreal were the excitement that he had during the playoffs and then once the team won the Stanley Cup. Happy for him. I'll also mention a couple of people, and it's interesting because their names are, one is below the other on the Stanley Cup. If you see the picture of the engraving, first of all is Sylvain Lefebvre. And unfortunately, Sylvain Lefebvre, fans didn't really get to know him. He was put in a bad situation under Marc Bergevin. Marc Bergevin was pulling the strings, making the decisions, didn't always make Sylvain Lefebvre look very good. Sylvain Lefebvre was a good soldier while he was the head coach in Laval, first in St. John's, and then in Laval. And I thought he was, they had good teachers at that point. Sylvain Lefebvre is a good teacher. His assistant at that point was Donald Dufresne. They called him the professor, an exceptionally good teacher. Those are two good hockey guys. But Sylvain Lefebvre, in this case, being the assistant coach under Paul Maurice, and happy for him that he has his name on the Stanley Cup. Again, and below him on the cup is Rick Dudley. Rick Dudley was an advisor to Marc Bergevin, and Rick Dudley left because he said Marc wasn't listening to his advice, and went to Florida where Bill Zito welcomed his advice. Rick Dudley, I sat with him more than a handful of times and watched games. I've never learned as much about the game of hockey than sitting beside Rick Dudley. He talks out loud while the game's going on, and his insights, what he sees on the ice, like nobody else I've ever sat with to watch a game. He's just the smartest man in hockey, and certainly I'm sure he contributed to the Stanley Cup. So I know we're talking about the Montreal Canadiens, and I'll speak as glowingly about the members that will help them get to the next cup. But I just have to admire a few good hockey people on the list of the names that are on the current Stanley Cup.
You know what? Let's talk about one more former member of the Montreal organization while we're at it. Why don't we?
All right.
The Anaheim Ducks have added former Canadiens goaltender Peter Budaj to their coaching staff. I think that's pretty cool. He was a goalie coach for the Colorado Avalanche affiliate, the Colorado Eagles, just last season. So I think good for Peter Budaj. Kind of an interesting career. Looking back on his stats, he actually had a winning record by the end of it. Mostly a backup goaltender, but excited to see him get a new opportunity in that young Anaheim Ducks organization.
Yeah, he a backup for Carey Price, of course, and he was one of those guys that understood his role. He had a very good relationship. I think Carey has said in the past that he really liked the tandem with Peter Budaj, and at one point. Budaj was with the St. John's Ice Caps. We got the chance to talk to him. He's a delightful person to talk to. Knows a lot about the game. And Anaheim is remember this is a while back, but we talked about the Canadiens should be setting up a department of goaltending. Well, that's exactly what Anaheim has done. They took their current goaltending coach, elevated him to the director of goaltending position, responsible for goaltending throughout the organization, which made there was an opportunity, a hole to fill, and Peter Budaj is now the goaltending coach for the Anaheim Ducks, and good luck to him. Good guy, and I hope he is a good coach for them.
Now, Rick, I think I'm going to knock on wood and cross my fingers here. This might be the last time we speak of the Arizona organization. The NHL Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly has reported that Alex Murello has agreed to and signed all the necessary agreements and paperwork to relinquish his rights to the Coyotes. And with that, let's start the parade.
This is sad. This is mostly sad for Gary Bettman. They found a fall guy to let everything die with about the franchise. But what a failure in Arizona for the Coyotes organization, and constantly propping them up. And we know the reason this happened. There was the land. Alex Murello, the organization went to Utah, all the assets, he sold that all off, but he retained the rights to bring back the franchise if they could get the arena and all the stipulations. There was that bizarre sort of land auction thing that was withdrawn, and that seemed to be the last straw for Alex Murello. He said, "I'm done. No more. I'm relinquishing my control." And that's it. That's the final chapter. Let's hope. As far as we know, that's the end of the story of hockey in Arizona.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I think we both like Arizona hockey fans. I feel bad for them, all the things
absolutely.
they've had to go through.
Yeah.
Not their fault at all. I think they supported about as much as they could. I think this is all on Gary Bettman and just a failed experiment. This thing had been going on for years, so I'm kind of just happy that this is hopefully the last I have to hear about it for a while at least.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Some news coming from Hockey Canada. Trevor Murphy has been hired as the Vice President of Hockey Development. He's previously held executive roles with the St. John's Ice Caps of the American Hockey League and the ECHL Newfoundland Growlers. So someone that, like you said, you're a little bit familiar with, and I think this is a pretty good role for him to take on. Yeah,
a lot familiar with. Trevor's a great hockey guy. Got to know him quite a bit when he was the director of hockey operations for the St. John's Ice Caps. As Brian Rogers, the broadcaster, would say, he hails from beautiful Mount Pearl, Newfoundland. And Trevor, when he was with the Ice Caps, he just wore every hat there was. That director of hockey operations meant he did everything, and he was good at everything, and it was good to us as well. A pleasure to talk hockey with him. As you said, went on to look after, be the president of the Newfoundland Growlers, and now has a spot with Hockey Canada. Very deserving, wonderful career, and I know he'll do good things with Hockey Canada.
We reported last week that a whole bunch of ELCs were signed for some of the first-round picks in the 2024 draft. We have a little bit more to report on this week. TJ Ginla, Macklin Celebrini, Sam Dickinson, Artem Levshunov are all added to this list among a heck of a lot more players.
There's a million of them. Most of them, let me see, if you go 1 to 18, I think that Carter Yaremchuk with the Senators is unsigned. Demidov, of course, is unsigned. And Michael Gage is unsigned. But I was talking about the top 18. There's not many. Saleev with New Jersey's not yet signed. And Zeev William with Minnesota Wild unsigned. I think that's it in the top 18. Everybody else has... from the 2024 draft, the first round picks have signed their entry-level contracts.
You mentioned the names of a few defensemen here, and last week we talked about rankings put out by Jay Fresh. So let's put those two.
And that went over well,
here.
Didn't it?
Yeah. Great reaction there. Well, let's talk about some defense, and then we have some goalies to talk about, and I'm sure we'll get quite the reaction from this. So this was all based off of a fan vote for the 2024-25 top 64 defensemen. I'll give you a quick 1 through 5 here. Cale Makar, Quinn Hughes, Roman Josi, Adam Fox, Miro Heiskanen. I think that's about right for a top 5. Looking up and down the list here, I'm not seeing any Montreal Canadiens players within the top 64. And yeah, it's not great. To be honest, I don't think any of them at the moment at least belong within the top 64. What do you think?
Yeah, Jay Fresh, just to review, we talked about him last week. Analytics guy put out his projections for the coming season and had the Canadiens in 31st place, I believe, regressing to 69 points. No, it didn't make Canadiens fans happy. That was what his model said, so that's what he published. As far as this is a fan vote and a pretty interesting vote. 183,000, more than 183,000 votes cast by 2,896 voters. If you're doing a political poll, that's plus or minus 3 for margin of error, which is good. Nothing in and listen, Montreal's got a huge fan base, especially on social media. If the defensemen were worthy, they would appear on this top 64 list. Shouldn't be an issue at all. We've been talking about former Canadians, so there are some former Canadians on this list. Number 19, Mikhail Sergachev, now a member of the Utah Hockey Club. And in Nashville, number 49, Ryan McDonough. We don't want to talk about that trade. So you said in the top 64, we don't see a Canadian. We do see 3 Colorado Avalanche. And 3 Utah Hockey Club defensemen on this list. Wow.
Yeah, Utah made a lot of good trades over the course of the draft, so that certainly helped them out. One more thing I want to point out, because I like poking fun of Toronto, their highest ranked defenseman comes in 31, and it's the veteran Chris Tanev, and I don't think that's a great look for the Toronto Maple Leafs at all, if we're being honest.
Oh, and we should tell folks, you did some digging, and Mike Matheson isn't on this list. It's a top 64 list, but he does appear at number 68, just off the list.
Yeah. Taking a look at the top 64 goaltenders, same thing from Jay Fresh based off of a fan vote. Goaltenders, I like looking at this list. I like the fact that it's 64. You have 32 teams, so a starter and a backup. They should all technically fit in there. I like to draw a line just after number 32 and be like, okay, there's the group of starters. 33 onward should be the backup goaltenders, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you another top 5 here just to set the tone here. So coming in at 1, Shesterkin, 2, Hellebuck, 3, Vasilevsky, 4, Jeremy Swayman, and 5, UC Saros. That's hard to argue with that. Yeah. That's pretty good. Something I think our listeners might also be kind of interested in is with all these international tournaments coming up. You talked about the Four Nations Cup. Who might be in net for Canada? Well, the highest ranked Canadian goaltender comes in number 12, and that's Aiden Hill from the Vegas Golden Knights. And then a little bit of separation before a run of other Canadian goaltenders, 14 to 16, all Canadians, Stuart Skinner, Jordan Binningston, and Logan Thompson. So a lot of Canadian goaltenders coming in kind of middle of the pack, but I'm a hopeful guy. I'm pretty hopeful that one of them will take a step forward this coming year. What about Montreal Canadiens? Well, you're going to have to look pretty far down the list before you get anywhere. I'll mention that a former Montreal Canadien ends up number 33, so kind of in backup goalie territory, and that's Jake Allen, if you remember Jake Allen. And one spot behind him, Sam Montembeault, interesting, at number 34. So definitely in the higher end of the backup territory is one Sam Montembeault. And again, like you said, the Montreal Canadiens fans have a pretty big presence online. So it's interesting that after all of Montreal media and various fans trying to pump up this guy, he ends up outside of starting goaltending territory. Not only that, but Caden Primo does not appear on this list. Only one Montreal Canadiens goaltender in the top 64. The Vegas Golden Knights, the greedy organization that they are, 2 goalies within the top 32 with Hill and Samsonov. Samsonov comes in at 31, and Akira Schmid at number 63. So 3 goaltenders for the Vegas Golden Knights, 1 for the Montreal Canadiens, and he's slotted in looking like a backup goaltender at the moment.
Yeah. Waiting for a starter, waiting for that franchise goaltender. And yes, we have a fill-in, but yeah, as much as the media and some fans pump the tires of Sam Montembeault, not going to be the goaltender that when the Canadiens, when that core comes together and when they start being competitive. He's not going to be part of the mix. You mentioned Jake Allen's ahead of him. The other, we're talking about former Canadians. So he was a Canadian briefly. That was Casey DeSmith at number 51 for Dallas. Former goaltender Charlie Lindgren up at 21. And the interesting thing is that Charlie Lindgren made the biggest jump from the previous year. He climbed 41 spaces from the previous year's list. So good for Charlie. Anthony Stolarz also made a big jump. Of course, he was the backup for Florida, a Stanley Cup winner. Now with the Toronto Maple Leafs, he jumped 35 spots. So, yeah, I don't think there's anything, Canadiens fans may grumble about Montembeault's placing or the fact that Primo isn't on the list. I would just challenge those 2 goaltenders to prove Jay Fresh and all the voters wrong in the upcoming season.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, let's get to our first break here. We'll hear a message from our sponsors, and then we'll get to our big topic segment, Eat, Sleep, Train, Repeat with Rocket Sports medical consultant Dr. Stephen Morris. This is the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio.
Bet the action on the ice with DraftKings Sportsbook. Hey, listen, just because the Stanley Cup just got awarded does not mean that now is not the best time to sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook if you haven't done so already, because you are going to want to be set to bet all the action on the ice once the season opens again in the fall. Now is the best time to get set up to do that. And hey, there are tons of great sports that you can be placing bets on with DraftKings Sportsbook all summer long. And, kind of learn your way around the app and get comfortable and have a great time while you're doing it. So, hey, download the app now and use code THPN. And new customers can get $150 instantly in bonus bets for betting just $5 on hockey. That's code THPN only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. The crown is yours. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, 21 plus age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See dkng.com/hockey for eligibility and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gaming resources. NHL and the NHL Shield are registered trademarks of the National Hockey League. Copyright NHL 2023. All rights reserved.
Welcome back to the Canadiens Connection podcast, right here on Rocket Sports Radio. My name is Michael Spinella, and you can find me on Twitter at the Spinella. And with me in the studio is our president and founder of Rocket Sports, Rick Stevens. Make sure to give him a follow on Twitter at Rocket Sports. You can also follow at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and visit our website, canadiensconnection.fm. And just a little reminder here to make sure that you tap that subscribe button to the Canadiens Connection podcast in your favorite player or on your favorite podcasting app. That way you never miss a single episode. And just to kind of set the tone before Dr. Stephen Morris steps into the studio with me, fans of the Montreal Canadiens are still buzzing about the success of the 2024 draft. Jeff Gordon, Kent Hughes, and the scouting staff have injected talent into this prospect pipeline.
Yeah, I think you're right. The fans are pretty excited, still on cloud nine, talking about the draft and the really talented set of mostly offensively talented prospects that have been injected. Listen, if you look at these newly drafted NHL prospects, if you've read any kind of scouting report, if you've talked to a scout, they're going to tell you, and some even kind of assign a value to their skating ability, their shooting ability, passing, puck handling, hockey sense, their physical play. But certainly after leaving the Montreal Canadiens Development Camp, those Habs prospects are going to head home and they're going to do drills. They're going to do off-season training. They're going to be in the gym. They're going to be on the ice. And engage themselves in some sort of personalized training regime in the hopes of improving that on-ice performance for their upcoming season, wherever that might be. So they'll probably look at, we heard the exit meetings that the prospects had, and they each have customized workouts and things and goals to work on over the off season. And there might be specific techniques to increase their speed and explosiveness, their strength and their fitness. But I think what we heard from the prospects is they also have to pay attention to lifestyle habits, things like sleeps, things like nutrition, things like hydration. So with all that in mind, we invited our Rocket Sports media consultant back to the show. You know him, Dr. Stephen Morris. He's going to join Michael in the studio to talk about off-season training, preparation, and education for elite athletes. And we'll send it over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, and I would like to welcome our Rocket Sports media medical consultant to the show, Dr. Stephen Morris. How are you doing today, Dr. Morris?
I am good, Michael. Thank you for having me, as always.
Always excited to have you on the show here. We're going to talk about a couple of different things as it pertains to the offseason here. Of course, the Habs have a ton of younger prospects, and I wanted to chat with you about a few things like offseason training, off-ice habits, and fitness evaluations as it relates to career trajectories for many different players. How does that sound to you, Doc?
Yeah, sounds good to me. I love this stuff, so I'm ready to go and get stuck into it.
Perfect. Well, just before we get ready to go here, just going to put in a little disclaimer here. Dr. Stephen Morris is a senior registrar with the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners with a background in human biomechanics and muscles physiology with a master's degree in these fields. He can speak about generalities based on of his expertise, but he's not been in contact with any of the players we're about to talk to, and neither has he seen the medical files of any of them. Is there anything else you wanted me to add, or that's all correct?
No, it's too long already.
Too long? Well, with that, let's get right into it. It's not been too long since we were talking about development camp for the Montreal Canadiens on the Canadiens Connection podcast here. Of course, development camp is just as much about evaluating players as it can be about educational experience for many of them. I think most people will understand in general how fitness and strength is important to athletes on kind of a broad scope here, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the importance of healthy off-ice habits, things like sleep, nutrition, and whatnot. And actually, I'm going to play a little clip here coming from one of our recent first-round draft picks, Michael Hage, and this is him at development camp talking about that sort of stuff.
Go home and continue to train, whether that's on the ice, take what I learned this week in the sense of the way I got to carry myself. The habits these guys have are unbelievable, and I think it's something that I've learned from. Obviously, these guys are great players and they're here, but they still continue to do the little things, whether it's away from the rink, training, eating, sleeping. They take that stuff so seriously, and I think this week I really got to see that and learn that. And so just go home, continue to train, and take what I learned this week and just try to use it.
So kind of interesting there from Michael Hage. It's not too often you hear these hockey players talk about things like sleep and off-ice habits. So I'll get your reaction and let you talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting to see what they pick up when they first go to these camps and meet professionals that do it regularly. You would think that by the time they're at such a high level already, they have a lot of exposure to this stuff. But I think we might be a bit naive into the fact that they might not, and they really might not know a great deal about how to take care of themselves off of the ice. For me, I think, it's interesting you mentioned sleep and nutrition, so I'll just touch on that. I think a lot of, at the developmental level, a lot of focus is put into not only developing healthy habits like he discussed, but also like lean body mass and what people say a lot of terms like bulking up, for example. And I think this all has a lot of role into it in the way that prospects are drafted and try to be developed not only as players, but physically as well. Sleep, I won't dive too much into it, but of course is a critical sort of recovery step for all of us. And I think that when you look at the younger athlete, anyone sort of between the age of 15 and 20, sleep habits can actually be quite poor, and we see that in practice. And it's a consequence of sort of the way that the life outside of hockey works. And, you do have to live life, but it does sort of seep into things. And so when I talk with people, not only young athletes, but also sort of anyone that comes into the clinic or office, we talk about establishing really good sleep hygiene, schedule regularity, managing the things we do around and before sleep to sort of maximize that. And one of the important reasons from, if you're a hockey player looking at this is all that work you're doing on the ice, all that work you're doing in the gym, you need to give yourself time to recover. And, that's not going to happen with that adequate amount of time with rest. Looking at something like 8 hours a night, for example, is just a benchmark, but that varies from person to person. But one of the things to take away here is about probably something they're doing, might even do more learning on, is nutrition. When you're training off ice, when you're training on ice, when you're spending thousands and thousands of calories most days of the week, the way that you replenish that, the degree that you replenish that, is key not only for sustaining yourself to continue to perform at a high level, replace the things you lose, give your body what it needs, but also optimize the way that you sort of put on weight and what's called protein synthesis. And that's how we build sort of this healthy mass. And when you look at a lot of the prospects, they're, people say they need to quote unquote fill out and things like that. And, these are the steps that are required as they train and as they age. So the things we're looking at here that I would, again, say to really any young athlete, but also most people that walk in the rooms that are looking to better themselves from an athletic point of view is looking to sort of use whole food sources. And I think of a lot of the athletes these days know to do that and are doing that and avoiding processed foods. When you're exercising regularly and trying to build muscle, having a reasonable protein target, something like 1 to up to 2 grams per kilogram per day, or per pound per day, of appropriate sources, like things like lean meats like turkeys and chickens over your things like pork and steak. Of course, you can have them sometimes, but trying to find sort of primary things that fit that bill. Using carbs in a good way to replace, the energy that you need through exercise. A lot of the conversations I have on a day-to-day basis are around like what are good and bad carbs, avoiding simple sugars and added sugars, avoiding insulin spikes with those things, and picking things that are more complex in nature, like a sweet potato, for example. And the reason is not only is it something that's going to be less converted into these sort of, I'll use the term useless fats later down the track, but they'll also optimize windows of protein synthesis after exercise that can help us build muscle. The fat sources we choose are really important. We probably all know a little bit about that, but opting for things like poly and monounsaturated fats, whether it's avocado, olive oils, fish sources, and avoiding those trans-unsaturated fats make a huge difference. And all of this stuff is just a drop in the bucket every day that at the end of a month, end of a year, really adds up to a lot. Not only in terms of which way we go sort of from a performance point of view, but also how our bodies develop. Of course, one of the other things in young people is making sure they get enough vegetables. Like getting 4 servings of vegetables is actually surprisingly difficult for most people, and also managing their micronutrients, avoiding things like alcohol, and definitely not underdoing it calorically as well. So there's so much for them to be aware of. We could talk hours about supplementation and being aware of what banned substances are. And I think ultimately what I would take from this is anyone who is either going to these development camps or wants to be someone who's sort of performing at a high level, at least once, I think a nutritional assessment is really good. It can give you a lot of perspective about the things you're putting into your body, what they're made up of, and what that really means. So anyone sort of in that 15 to 20 age bracket who's at a high level of sports and hasn't done that, I would suggest they do, just to get a bit of perspective around like what these healthy habits are and how they affect us. I looked up before coming on here just something for if anyone was listening to this and wanted a bit of a guide. The Sacred Heart University hockey team has a online PDF that sort of outlines a bit of this stuff, and that would be a good place to start, I think, if you're at ground zero. But getting some professional help, of course, is always something that's good too.
Wow, that's a ton of great information there, and I think I understand why a very popular pregame meal seems to be chicken and pasta with hockey players. I feel like I hear about that quite a bit, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that pasta source, it can be made up of a lot of things, like whether that's, traditional pasta or if it's made up of chickpea or something different. But in either case, you're getting these readily available carbohydrates that we're going to use. And we'll talk about later for things like anaerobic exercise and energy sources, as well as the pasta is just a light lean meat, or the chicken is a light lean meat, as opposed to something heavy like steak. Back in the day, steak and eggs used to be a pre-game meal. And that's old and out of there now for a lot of good reasons, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And a little bit of a follow-up here. In general, if you go online or just anywhere you look, there's a lot of crazy information out there these days about nutrition, fitness, and just healthy habits in general. If you could give advice to a young hockey player about any or all of these, what would that be?
Yeah, look, I think... as we talked about before, we even recorded, we said this could be a 6-hour podcast if we wanted it to be. And that's because there is so much out there and there's so much variability. I think given we just talked about nutrition, I'll just touch on fitness for young hockey players. I think that the first thing you need to know, and this applies to nutrition as well, is there's really no best way to do this. One of the traps is thinking that if you're not doing it a certain way, you're doing it wrong, and anything other than that is not going to get you what you need. And that's definitely not true. So we know that's true for athletes as well as patients in the clinic. So the best thing you can do initially is actually just get the right help. If you are overwhelmed by, what training is, if you're overwhelmed by the idea of trying to tackle all these different buckets of training needs, then get some help. and there's lots and lots of it out there. I think as a hockey player, especially one with a busy schedule, you have your off season, your in season, your playoffs. They use an approach called periodization, and we know that something up to 90% of NHL teams and most professional sports teams do this as well. And that's where you vary what your training loads are and your goals, depending on the section of the year that you're in. So in your off season, your goals are more focused on sort of progression of whether it's strength, agility, speed, and you can focus more on your what traditionally is known as dry land sort of progress, whereas in season, you're more focused on maintenance of those things that you've attained in the off season. One thing people might not know is that players do train during the season. They just do it at a much lower volume than they would in the off season. So they're always working out and they're always training to keep the progress that they've made. And the other thing too is you have to remember during the season they're losing a lot more calories and their sort of weights will be lower than they will in the off season. So it's hard to make progress in that way as well. The primary areas that you should be aware of if you're looking to sort of program something around becoming a more elite athlete at any level, but particularly in hockey, is aerobic fitness. So that's like our long-term sort of energy systems, the one that help us get through all 60 minutes of the game or overtimes and more. The anaerobic fitness, the sort of short to medium term burst systems that help us get through the high intensity needed in shifts. Of course, strength training and using what we call progressive overload strategies to build muscle mass over that course of the off season and then keep it. Speed and agility and a lot of common things that people do here are things like plyometrics, but also Olympic lifting in the last probably decade has made a big shift and a big has been introduced to athletes beyond those just doing that sport. Sports specific stuff and biomechanical sort of actions are really important as well. And that's more nuanced, of course. Flexibility, you can't forget about. And then lastly, if it wasn't enough already, to work on those on ice skills and skills training, sort of the things that don't require weights, but you need to be on ice and with a coach. Given the amount of ground to cover, I think one of the things that we see a lot is how does that influence young hockey players where they actually choose to play? If you look at those that go to college, for example, versus junior hockey, there's a lot less games and there's more time to build in that offseason and build between games. So if you're looking to be someone who maybe puts on a bit more mass, grows in the 2 years post-draft a bit more than someone who's playing in junior hockey, that might be the route for you. In addition, I think that in Europe, and if you look at someone like David Reinbacher, for example, I don't think they play anywhere near as many games as junior hockey either. So I think they have a lot more time as well to grow and to build their deficiencies, which is also important to know about. I think all these players that are going into training, as we said, there's no one right way. And one of the reasons is because you need to be aware of your own needs and your own sort of deficiencies. If you're already really good at something, it's good to lean into it, but you need to make sure that you're tackling those areas that you're not as good in, whether that's speed or aerobic capacity or anaerobic fitness. And all of us will have our sort of genetic baseline that we start with, but we do have to work on those deficiencies. And of course, each position will have different requirements as well. The obvious sort of example of that being goaltender versus someone who plays, center, for example. So I think that there's so much to consider. Again, just like with nutrition, start with getting some help from someone so that you're investing your time as best you can and not sort of chasing something that might be not achievable.
Wow. Tons of great information in there. Great advice for any young hockey players out there. Want to talk about something maybe a little bit more kooky in terms of off-season training. We've seen the Habs do a number of kooky things in general over the years, but one that comes to mind is very specifically with Juraj Slafkovsky last summer when he was seen wearing some very stylish or like Terminator-esque sunglasses on the ice. It turns out these were strobe glasses, and he spent some time in the Czech Republic with strength and conditioning coach Michael Bretina. These glasses are supposed to help athletes improve their speed, timing, and focus through strobe training. Is this something you're familiar with, and is there any information out there on whether or not these glasses are actually impactful?
So yeah, the stroboscopic visual training, I'd seen it very minimally back in about 2014 or 2015 when I was doing my own master's in a different field. I knew some people in the labs that were using it. Wasn't intimately involved in that sort of thing, but as you said, it's really around trying to maximize certain capabilities that are vision dependent and reaction dependent, like hand-eye coordination, reaction time, and even sort of visual finding. And then sort of stressing people beyond what they would normally experience, and then hoping that in a game, when things are picked up, when you're tired, when you don't have time to choose, you can still rely on those skills. Essentially, the way they work, if you know, people listening have no idea what we're talking about, is you have these glasses, and they're made up of liquid crystals within the lenses, and they can actually alternate between transparent, so you can see through it, or opaque, where you can't. And you can change not only the density of how opaque the glasses turn, but also the frequency in which they do that, and that's controlled through sort of an external control. So you can make it really fast shifting, really slow shifting, whatever you want to do. There's tons and tons and tons of studies that suggest that this is valuable in some ways. I think the most, from my own research, the most consistent finding is that it does improve baseline hand-eye performance across sort of a number of sports, among other things. I guess when it comes to hockey, one of the interesting things I found was in 2015, actually, they did a study of 6 Carolina Hurricane players in the offseason, or in their training camp, sorry. They took a couple of forwards and a couple of defensemen. For the forwards, they made them skate in like a figure-8 pattern and then shoot a puck into an empty net. And for the defensemen, they made them do a sort of a circle around their own net and then make a pass to an area that was marked with an X. And they found that the ones that were doing this at least 10 minutes a day for about 2 weeks showed about 20% improvement in their hockey-specific performance, which are those tasks. Now, you could make a lot of arguments about that, whether those tasks are relevant and all that kind of thing. But you do see some improvement. I think on the whole, it's a low risk thing to do. It's a low cost thing to do. It's very easy to implement. The biggest question that I have is, how frequently do you have to do it to actually retain that hand-eye change and to retain that reaction time? So there's something called an extinction effect, where if you do this sort of training and then let's say 30 days later, you're just like you were beforehand. So I think that this is something you have to do regularly. Maybe goalies would do it before every game, or players would do it before every game to keep sharp. And that might be a role for something like this, more so than off-season training, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and we'll have to keep our eyes out if we see Slavkovsky before a game wearing these glasses, of course.
Yeah.
Wanted to talk to you a little bit about fitness training here. This year, it has come and gone, but the Draft Combine is a pretty big annual event. Just wondering if you can talk a bit about how the results of the Draft Combine can be useful information for various teams around the league here.
Yeah, this is such a good thing to look into, and I've been a hockey fan for a very long time. I've been interested in sports science for a very long time, and I've never actually sat down and looked at if there was any data to support, draft combine testing and what we should look at to guide choices. I'll preface this by saying, of course, like if you're looking at 2 players and one is obviously, head and shoulders above one, then you pick that person regardless of what their VO2 max is, but the importance of this sort of thing is to help you choose between 2 close prospects, just like position is, just like height is, just like their handedness is, or their so there's a lot of factors. This is not the end all be all. But what I found was this: they actually did a study over 25 years. This is between the years 1994 and 2007 in terms of the draft combines assessed. And then they assessed their performance between 1995, so the first year post-draft initial year, and 2020. So it's actually pretty recent. Every year they looked at the top 120 players of that draft year for a total of over 1,000 players over this 25-year span, with a bit more forwards and defensemen, but that's okay. What they looked at and what they found ultimately was the 2 primary predictors of success, of a successful career, whether it's time on ice, points, how fast they transition to the NHL, for example, all were related to peak leg power, which they measured through the vertical jump test, and VO2 max. So the 2 most important factors are those 2 things, peak leg power and VO2 max. The other, probably more interesting thing to me was that the sort of the factor that predicts or is inversely related to long-term performance, as in the higher it is, the worse you are off in the long term, is upper body strength. So they found that the more upper body strength you had at draft day, 10 years later, you were less likely to be successful in terms of cumulative points than if it was lower, which is kind of counterintuitive on the whole. You would just think people that are stronger are going to be better off in general, regardless of where that is, but it's definitely not true according to this data. So then you have to ask yourself, why is this the case? Well, when you look at short-term performance, like how fast does someone get into the NHL, year 1, year 2, year 3, and its relation to lower body strength, I think we all can identify that the game relies on not only explosiveness and the ability to sort of have short bursts with your shifts, but also your ability to do that further and further into the game, which is defined by aerobic capacity or the VO2 max. Interestingly, while these factors predict success, they were not associated with the draft order. So at the time, people aren't using them to pick, it doesn't look like, but later down the line, it shows that actually they probably should have. I think they talk about, the authors of the paper talk about how we're in a speed era in the NHL, and I think we could also all agree about that. We're not the Broad Street bullies anymore, and this is a much faster game and skilled game. And so having the strength in your legs, having the capacity to go for long shifts, for double overtime, whatever you need, and still be explosive is really, really important. So the factors they used for the upper body performance in terms of how it inversely was related to performance was the bench press and push-ups, as well as isometric grip strength. And I think that the most interesting thing I read here was they talked to some scouts, and the scouts said, well, look, we often pick people with certain skill sets and expect that they will quote unquote fill out, which is something we talked about earlier in the segment. And that they will have sort of good career performance based on those things we picked them for, and they'll get there with the upper body strength. And immediately the first person I thought of was Beckett Seneca. He was the first person that came to my mind when I read that sentence. So ultimately, the usefulness of this study is that you can look at people with peak leg power, aerobic capacity, and use that to help differentiate between people you're not so sure about and people you are sure about. And there's actually some really good examples of this if you look at it. So now I'll ask you, Michael, can you think of any players who had pretty bad, if not horrible, upper body strength performance in the draft combine that have gone on to be very good players?
I don't know for sure. My brain is telling me to say Phil Kessel, but I can't guarantee that's correct.
That's actually a pretty good guess. I don't know about Phil Kessel, but so there's a very famous case which is Sam Bennett. Bennett did 0 pull-ups at the combine. 0 pull-ups. And he just played and won the Stanley Cup. And you would think of him as a physical, gritty player who gets in your face, not afraid of contact, had some of the worst upper body strength at the combine. And look at him now. Would you say he filled out? I would. Casey Middlestat, 1 bench press, 0 pull-ups. 1 bench press, 0 pull-ups. Very good player, was just sought after by the Colorado Avalanche, second line center, will likely blossom into the best version of himself in the next 2 to 3 years. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, 6 bench press at 150 pounds, and was famous for saying bench presses don't score goals at the combine. And I, again, just played for the Stanley Cup. So, it was interesting to retrospectively look back and be like, wow, this actually makes a ton of sense. Yeah. So I would look at this seriously and take the findings seriously, at least when it's helping you pick between 2 players you're not so sure of.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things you kind of mentioned here, and something that's supposedly one of the more difficult testings at the NHL Draft Combine, is the VO2 max testing. Like I said, I think you mentioned it a few times in there, but can you just lay out to me what exactly that is and how that might affect the results at the draft combine?
Oh, yeah. Well, in terms of how it would affect the draft combine result, I mean, as we just mentioned, aerobic capacity measured by VO2 max is one of the best predictors for success, not only in how fast, how fast players get to the NHL, but also, how well they'll do in the long run. So basically what it is, if you think about exercise, especially as you go longer and longer, the name of the game is really getting oxygen from the air that we breathe to our working muscles, through pumping of the heart and then metabolism in the muscle itself. Without oxygen, our aerobic sort of fitness, which is our long-term fitness, really just doesn't work. So when it comes to that sort of exercise, the effectiveness of the process of actually breathing in air, pumping it to the muscles and using it as fuel is summarized as the VO2 max. It's considered the gold standard of cardiovascular fitness, and of course is directly related to success and fitness across basically all sport. If anyone that has any level of aerobic capacity required, it will predict that. And we know that hockey players actually tend to have VO2 maxes of anywhere between, at the high level, between 50 and 60, which is definitely on the higher end. Some of the most famous sort of high VO2 maxes are like Norwegian skiers or cross-country skiers. They have ridiculously high VO2 maxes, and given the nature of their sport, you would expect that. It's basically just a measure of your cardiovascular fitness, and becomes more and more important the longer you're doing activity.
Yeah, makes sense there. And I think we've mostly seen this at the draft combine where the players are wearing some sort of a mask. Can you in any way kind of describe how they go about testing that? I think they're on bikes too. And there was a pretty famous case, not this year, but the year before, where one of the prospects actually ended up throwing up while testing this. So it seems like it is quite difficult, right?
Oh, it is, because if you want to know your sort of peak value, the best you can get, you really do have to push yourself to get to that point. The masks are used to measure sort of the ins and outs of breathing. So the amount of oxygen that's being consumed and CO2 that's being produced. That's why they have the mask on the face. We have at the university I used to work at when I was doing my master's, there was lots of people doing VO2 max assessments. You do have to push yourself. And the reason is, you want to, when you're at the combine and you're thinking, as I would be, especially after reading this paper, is, this VO2 max result could impact my draft stock. It could impact how people see me performing, 10 years down the line. So you want to do as best you can. You want to see how high of a number you can get. And, sometimes that's going to end up in you puking, I guess. Yep,
that's exactly it. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Stephen Morris, for all the time and information there. Plenty of great things there to consider. Like I said, in the off season, it's a great time to do training, and it's good to be educated on why fitness results would impact someone's draft stock. So thank you again for all of that. And just before we head out there, is there any final things that you wanted to mention?
No, I've got nothing else to add. I'm sure they're sick of hearing me already, but it was really fun to look into this stuff. And if there's anything that any of the listeners take away, it's when you're jumping into whether it's nutrition, sleep, sports training, and all that stuff, just make sure that if you're confused or if you feel like you're really overwhelmed, just reach out and get some help from someone and get off on the right foot.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time there, and have yourself a great rest of the day.
Thank you, sir.
Wow, that was terrific. Another great appearance by Dr. Stephen Morris. Thank you for handling that, Michael. Great interview. That we added Dr. Stephen Morris to the team this season, and he's knocked it out of the park every time he's come on. He's our Rocket Sports medical consultant. He can speak with some authority about what the kinds of things that not only the prospects, but the Canadiens players on the roster are going through in the off season as well. I really enjoyed that.
Well, thank you, and thanks again to Dr. Stephen Morris. Every time he comes on, I feel like I learn a wealth of knowledge that I didn't previously know, and things that I didn't even realize were going to be that interesting. So that's why we're very, very lucky to have him on board with us. And I think a lot of our listeners enjoy listening to him quite a bit too, as we have had some requests for him over the past couple months.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I think we'll head into our final break here, but I'll give everyone something to think about with our Canadiens Connection question of the week. Which Habs prospect do you believe has the greatest chance of making the opening night roster this year? We want to hear from you. And with that, make sure that you stay with us. You are listening to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio.
The Canadiens Connection is proud to be a partner of Rocket Sports Media, digital media publishers of sports and entertainment websites. Their mission is to build a worldwide network of sports fans who are informed, engaged, entertained, and connected. Learn more about RSM its team, and its portfolio of brands at rocketsportsmedia.com. I bet you enjoy sporting your best Habs jerseys, dressing up your kids and pets in the cutest Habs gear, and showing off your decked-out hockey cave or fanning. Well, don't just show your friends, show your Habs. The Rocket Sports Media team wants you to boast your finest pictures for our global network of Montreal Canadiens fans. Include the hashtag #ShowYourHabs when posting your fan photos on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Then log on to showyourhabs.com to see your entries, along with photos and posts from Habs fans all over the world. A proud member of the Rocket Sports Media Network. If you're a business owner looking for the perfect platform to reach a targeted audience of customers, Rocket Sports Media is the solution. Our global hockey community provides unmatched social media reach to an attentive demographic of sports and entertainment fans. We can provide visibility to your company, helping you to engage and leverage this prime group of potential clientele. In addition, we also offer sponsorship opportunities for fan events and featured areas of website content, giving you name and logo recognition. Visit rocketsportsmedia.com to contact us regarding this unique marketing opportunity. For the most trusted source of news, analysis, and features about the Montreal Canadiens, log in to thn.com/Montreal, your year-round source for anything Habs related. That's thn.com/Montreal.
Welcome back to episode 304. It's the Canadiens Connection podcast right here on Rocket Sports Radio. You can follow at Habs Connection on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Plus, make sure that you're checking out our website, canadiensconnection.fm. And if you have anything to say to us, feel free to text us anytime via the Rocket Sports text line, 5853-ROCKET. That's 5853-ROCKET. And just once again, big thanks to Dr. Stephen Morris in that second segment, bringing us a wealth of knowledge. And even though it's the off season, there's still a lot to talk about with these Montreal Canadiens, isn't there?
For sure.
So here's what you need to know from Rocket Sports. We cover the Montreal Canadiens, and you can find all of our content at InsideTheCanadiens.com. All the Canadiens coverage in one place. And on there, you can make sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, just at All Habs. You can search that on YouTube, and you'll be able to pull up our channel right there. We have been a reliable source that you can trust for the past 15 years. On there, you'll find a ton of content. Every single Monday, the Canadiens Connection podcast gets dropped on there. Last week's episode is entitled NHL Prospect Analyzes Montreal Canadiens' newest additions. That one had Chris Peters on there, and I think we got a pretty good reaction to it. I enjoyed listening to it as well. That was a great episode.
Yeah, Chris was terrific in all the insight that he provided on the Canadiens' brand new draft class. It was popular on as a download for our audio podcast, and pretty popular as well on YouTube. So thanks to Chris for that, and along with all of our draft guests, we were pretty happy to have him on board.
Absolutely. And throughout this offseason, we will also be putting out episodes of the Rocket Hockey Report and the Habs Hockey Report, typically hosted by our own Amy Johnson. So look out for those. Make sure you tap subscribe and hit the notification bell. But this past week, we put out an episode of the Rocket Hockey Report entitled 10 Montreal Canadiens Summer 2024 Headlines in 10 Minutes. And this is a fun one, right, Rick?
Yeah, the Habs Hockey Report, but it's all the same. And you can find it in the same place. But yes, you like lists. You like lists of 10. You like lists of 10 in 10 minutes. That's all you need to devote to this. Keep up with what the Canadiens are doing. 10 headlines in 10 minutes. You want to go to our YouTube page, and while you're there, how about subscribing? YouTube.com/allhabs.
And while you're subscribing, make sure that you also subscribe to the premier Rocket Sports Radio podcast on your favorite podcasting app, The Canadiens Connection. You can find every single episode at canadiensconnection.fm. We'll be here every single Saturday throughout the summer. I know a lot of other podcasts go on vacation, they go on break, but we'll be here every single weekend. So don't you worry, we'll give you your Montreal Canadiens fix. And if you enjoy the show, we'd really appreciate if you left us a 5-star review. And if you want to help us out just a little bit more, you can share our podcast on X, Facebook, Reddit, or on any of your socials. We are your inside link to the Montreal Canadiens. Just a little Rocket Sports team announcement. Rick, I believe we're looking for people to reach out and contact us.
Yeah, reach out, contact us either by text 5853-ROCKET. Reach me directly at our email address, hello@rocketsportsmedia.com. We hear from so many of our listeners, and we appreciate each and every one. And you're very thoughtful. You ask good questions. You pose good, kind of scenarios, and we appreciate all of that. If you want to go one step further, and we have a platform here, both our podcasts, our YouTube shows, and if you want to be part of that, we have a lot of fun. And great experience for those looking to maybe get into the communication or journalism field. Reach out and say, hey, I'm passionate. I'm ready to be committed. I'm ready to be dedicated to a team to cover the Montreal Canadiens for this season. We've been doing this 15 years. We know what works, and we'll be glad to have you along for the upcoming season.
Yeah, and can confirm it is a ton of fun to follow along and be part of that Rocket Sports team. I think I'm coming up on 3 years. I've done 3 draft episodes with the Rocket Sports Media on the Canadiens Connection podcast, and honestly, it's a blast. So I recommend it. If you're curious at all, definitely reach out to us. We'd love to have a conversation with you. And now it's time to get to our Canadiens Connection question of the week, as we ask all of our listeners, which Habs prospect do you believe has the greatest chance of making the opening night roster? We want to make sure we hear from you. 5853 is the Rocket Sports text line. If people have a little bit more to say, Rick, I believe we have an email as well.
Yep. 2 ways to do it. The text line, 5853-ROCKET, or by email, hello@rocketsportsmedia.com.
We get a ton of text, tweets, emails, and comments throughout the weeks, and we had quite a bit of reaction to last week's episode. On episode 303, the Canadiens Connection question of the week was, the Canadiens were quiet in free agent market this week. Is it the right approach at this stage of the rebuild, or do you wish Kent Hughes had aggressively pursued a big free agent signing? And we had a few people leave us comments on their thoughts. I'll start things off. We lightly edit these as well, just for clarity, just so you know. And this one comes from Chris Wanamaker 7930, and what Chris has to say is, free agents don't make sense right now. Maybe next year, definitely in 2 years. And I think you're about right and correct on that one, Chris. That's probably the right timeline for them.
Yeah, and I think that's basically what Kent Hughes said, that they were looking to, if they're going to add it all, it would be a short-term contract. And nobody was willing to agree to that. So they remain disciplined, and they'll go with what they have for now. So I appreciate Chris appreciate the response to that question. Francois Bouvier 7861, he's commenting on Alex Burrows leaving the coaching staff and taking a role as a prospect consultant. And Francois says Burrows should have been gone when Marc Bergevin left. His line about wanting to spend more time with family, he says that's political line. Good call. That's our comment. That's what we had said. And he goes on to say, hopefully Burrows doesn't mess up where he ends up, and that's with the prospects. My money says he's gone completely from the organization in 18 months. So we'll check back in that time to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Love all the comments. If you reach out to us by text or email, I would like to say make sure you let us know your first name and where you're from. That way we know who we're talking to.
And I'm just going to, before we leave this, we had loads of questions, comments about an article that appeared that was just, it was brutally inaccurate. It was talked about Logan Mailloux and his disappointing season. I'll just say that we are no longer affiliated with that organization. We brought you some great work over there. They brought in some people without any experience who obviously haven't been following the team for the past year to write some things. The article was absolutely absurd. And it got crushed on social media, rightly so, by Canadiens fans, because they hadn't obviously paid any attention to Logan Mailloux, hadn't paid attention to Laval Rocket or the Canadiens last season. Listen, we say we're the most trusted source for the Montreal Canadiens for a reason. We've been, as I said, doing this for 15 years. Logan Mailloux, be excited about this prospect. He finished last year 47 points. He set a new franchise record for most goals by defensemen. We talked about his record-breaking season in May. If you want to hear comments about Logan Mailloux, I'd direct you to Canadiens Connection episode 295. And that we had a guest on that show. The guest was Logan Mailloux's dad. That's Jeff Mailloux, and he sat down with us to discuss Logan's record-breaking season and his goals for the upcoming Habs training camp. So instead, check that out if you want to know the truth about all Habs prospects, but certainly in particular this one. That's episode 295.
I'll also throw in that Logan Mailloux is a very coveted right shot on defensemen, so that's certainly more reason why we like this kid, and we're super excited to follow his career.
Absolutely.
So CH Weekly, a couple things coming up this summer in Montreal over the next week. JFL is going to start on July the 19th. There will be some free shows this year down at Place des Festivals, so look out for that. And also this weekend, you'll catch the very end of Taste of the Caribbean at Old Port Montreal. That ran from July 11th, and it goes until July the 14th. So ends tomorrow on Sunday. So if you're looking for something to do in Montreal, plenty of free festivals, and honestly, just so many that I might even be missing a whole whack of them too. Soul
Fest as well this weekend. I just spotted that. That is going to attract a few people, and maybe even me. No, I got to pack. I got to remain disciplined, just like Kent Hughes, and do some packing for my big move coming up.
Yeah, looking forward to being in the new studio there with you, Rick, and coming up pretty soon.
That's
but
right.
For today, that's going to be a wrap for us. Thank you all for listening. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Canadiens Connection podcast in the player or on any of your favorite podcasting apps. You can also share it on your socials if you like what you heard. And enjoy the week. We'll be back here next Saturday, July the 20th, for another great episode. Thank you all for listening to the Canadiens Connection podcast here on Rocket Sports Radio.
Click subscribe so you never miss an episode of Canadiens Connection. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Rocket Sports.